also don't just hit 500 balls without a thought.
Welcome to Earned and Not Given.
Guys, I'm so excited to have the legend Steve Furlonger here with us. Steve, you're obviously one of the pioneers in research and study in ground reaction forces, how that correlates to optimal speed production. Your track record speaks for itself, taking players from the county level to touring pros, to having wins on the tour level, to having wins at the long drive level, to the work that you've done with Lee Cox, and that history just speaks for itself. So on behalf of everybody, we're just so excited to have you here and can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. To give people some understanding of kind of how you started and what kind of made you, I don't want to say obsessed because sometimes people think that's the wrong term, but I think knowing you and getting to be around you, there is this obsession, and you went down this journey of study that is allowing you now to not only help the players that come to you, but also help coaches around the world. And I think that's what connected us, is your coach education. So if you could give us a little bit of insight as to how this journey started.
Okay. Well, thank you. Firstly, it's an absolute pleasure to come onto the podcast, and thank you for the invitation. And obviously, you know, it was great working with you guys when I was out in the States earlier on in the year. So a little bit about me without boring you too much. PGA professional, full-time coach, based in the UK. My journey as a professional kind of started, as we all did, using video. Felt that there was something missing with video, needed a little bit more than just the 2 dimensions that we get from our video. And came across a pressure mapping system called BodyTrack 12 years ago. It had just been released in Canada. It was actually the parent company, Vista Medical, were using the technology, which was sensors in material, and they had it under patients' beds in hospitals to detect whether the patient was moving at night. And they took this material and then built this pressure map called BodyTrack. And I saw it and I was like, oh, that looks really cool. You know, a portable map that you could measure vertical force and pressure. So I was like, oh, I fancy some of that. So I contacted the company. Nobody had taken any units out of Canada. So I bought a unit, got it shipped over to the UK. And then I became a distributor. So I was one of the first distributors outside of Canada. And it was a little bit too advanced. We'd kind of really just got into FlightScope and TrackMan at that point. And for me, it was like, am I a little bit too far ahead of the game here? And it didn't really sell in the first year. And then within 2 years, it went, viral, across the States. These units were from 2012, 13, 14, 15. They were just churning out units, BodyTrack. And that started it all for me, because it was measuring just one of the linear forces, the pushing down into the ground. Although it wasn't very well synchronized, it still gave us an idea of what was happening. And I remember taking that unit over to, I'd been talking to Lee Cox for about 2 years prior to that, and was always picking his brains on, long drive. He was coaching, Joe Miller at the time, and brought him up from junior into world champion. And Lee and I were talking regularly, and I got this BodyTrack, and I was like, can I come over and just measure some of your players? Can you get Joe on it? So I went over there, and then the study began, right? So then we were beginning to see, players like Joe creating, they're big guys and weigh a bit, right? So they were multiplying that body weight vertically into the ground, over 2 times their body weight, 200%. So, and it's like, wow, these guys are really putting some force into the ground. And we know that because they jump, right? The fastest players, generally, their feet come off the ground. And, and there was a lot of conversation with Joe and understanding the footwear that he was wearing. And, it just triggered this kind of, for me, it was like, wow, this is incredible. So off the back of that, then I bought another force plate. I bought a SAM pressure plate, a SAM pressure plate. And that was good. That was a better device, a bit more sturdy, that it fixed in the ground rather than being portable and moving around as much. And then back in 2000 to 2021, was when I bought my dual force plate system, which was measuring force in 3 dimensions, and that was the golf system. And now I'm using motion to coach. So it was, it's been over a decade of obsession and study, just measuring one force now, for over 3 years now, measuring forces in 3D through the ground. And the resultant reaction, Newton's third law, that is energy back into the system, creating linear motion. But we also now can calculate the angular motion. So we get this energy up from the ground up through our body. And if those forces are angled away from our center of mass, they help us move in an angular fashion. And we're all trying to tilt, bend and turn when we swing. So we've now got kind of calculated values. We can look at how much energy going into the system that's aiding our tilt, bends and turns as well. So these are these dual force plate systems, and there's many of them on the market. And the one that you and we've both got in our facilities is Motion to Coach and their software and force plates.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. And I think off the back end of the PGA Championship and watching the golf this weekend, and we're seeing, Bryson have ball speed of 196, and we're seeing the changes that Chris and Xander have made to have him hit it longer. I think when I think of long drive or I think of speed, there's certain elements that we see, but it's really interesting to see that now over the last 10 years really starting to transition into the highest tour, right? Whether you're a PGA Tour guy or you're a DP World Tour guy or you're a live guy now, that need for speed is extremely important, right? And we have people that listen to this podcast that are very high-level golfers or very high-level coaches. We also have the recreational golfer. So I guess my first question to you, and the million questions that I'm going to try and cram into this education for our listeners, is what are those commonalities that you see between a player like Bryson, who's getting 196 ball speed, and Mr. Smith that wants to go from 88 miles an hour with the driver to 96? How is that going to actually correlate to him getting that ball speed upwards of 145, 150, whatever it happens, that magic window for that recreational golfer?
Yeah, and I mean, look, we talked a little bit about this when we were in person, right? I think that ultimately the player has to find the center of the face and get that smash factor up. And a lot of it that we see a lot of the time is what we term as glancing blows being a big problem when somebody's wiping across the golf ball. Let's just take the over the top and the chop and the slice. When you've got this glancing blow where the head is glancing across the ball severely to the left for a right-handed golfer, then they're opening up the face to try and sort of carve it back. And then they've got this big separation of path and face, which we know obviously from a path perspective, that's the curve potential on the ball. If they're swinging it way left of the target line, that face is then way open, which is adding loft. It's compromising the ability to strike the center of the face. So we get the face starting the ball, the path curving the ball, and we've got this massive wild slice. And a lot of the time it's a concept thing. They don't really understand that, they're told they're over the top, but they struggle to kind of fix it and sequence the body correctly. But that's a big deal. You've got to bring that glancing blow down. The best players are not swinging it more than, let's say on average 4 left of or 4 right of target to hit curves. They're certainly not doing what we see recreational golfers swinging it 8, 9, 10, 11 across the ball and creating these big glancing blows. So trying to bring the path down to as close as zero to possible, try and get that face squared up to the path, remove the glancing aspect of it, and I kind of close the gap down. And then we've got, obviously, from an angle of attack and loft standpoint, that kind of closing the gap with angle of attack and loft and closing the gap of path and face. And then we're ultimately going to increase our smash factor if we strike the center of the face, and that's going to help us with ball speed.
Yeah, it's amazing how when you really start to go down that pathway, right? When we watch players with the shot tracer on the PGA Tour this past weekend, and we're watching someone like a Colin Morikawa, right, curve the ball as much as he's curving the ball, yet still be able to hit it the distances that he's able to hit it, or you watch someone like a Bryson that's very straight with the things that he's doing with, locking out joints. And we could have a whole podcast about Bryson and the mastermind behind how Bryson's transformed his game. But when you see these players that are now doing 196, one seems to me, right? I coach a lot of the elite junior players, college players, up-and-coming tour players, and it seems to be right there around that 180 ball speed seems to be the magic number for a male golfer right now. When we're talking about a long drive player, what's that benchmark? If 180 is to be relevant on the PGA Tour or college golf, what's that ball speed to be relevant on the long drive circuit?
Much more. We got to be looking at 220 plus, right? So these guys are, increasing their club head speeds. They're swinging it. An amateur long driver might be 130 with club. A professional long driver's got to be north of 140. We're at the dizzy heights of seeing 160 now. So when you add that with the multiply it by the smash factor, we know that ball speed is considerably higher. I mean, you've got to be getting it north of 200. So, and 210, 215, if they're getting into the 20s, then in competition, that they're competing at the highest level.
So what are those things, right, that you would see, or because obviously you have the knowledge and the understanding and you've done the data collection of these world long drive champions, the best in the world, both as a long driver and as a tour player, you've seen those commonalities or differentiators between those players. What is the difference, or what stands out the most from 180 ball speed on the average PGA Tour player, somewhere between 180, 190, and then these world long drivers that are at 220 plus? What are they changing? Are they changing width of arc? Are they changing the way that they're loading the club? Are they changing their ability to explode? What do you see?
Okay, so first and foremost, I mean, a really good app for any, those listeners, download the app Tour Tempo, an app created by John Novosel Jr. Effectively, it's kind of like a frame counter, and it uses kind of what would be frames on the way back and frames on the way through. But it's a tempo app that helps you understand the speed of the swing and that relationship of ratio of 3 to 1, anything from 2.7 to 3.2 to 1. But the fastest players are swinging it back the fastest, swinging it forwards the fastest. Okay. So we're always looking at, a player that can, not necessarily look. I don't always go straight to the mechanics and say, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to make his swing a bit longer, make him jump around a bit more. Sometimes it could be just a little thing, just by putting on the Tour Tempo app and sticking on a kind of a Rory tempo at 21.7. Okay. And, long drivers are 18.6. So 21.7 for most people feels really fast because they'd be slower than that. And, you give them that app and you let them understand the start of the swing, the top of the swing, and then kind of the post-impact through position. And they've got to hit those auditory tones or voice calls. Yep. And when they realize, oh my God, I've got to go from here to here that quick. And you're like, yeah, that's what the fastest do. So the lowest hanging fruit would be to look at tempo and the fastest, as we know, the long drivers, they're all working at that 18.6 tempo, still that 3 to 1 ratio, but they're much quicker on the way back. Secondly, they swing it much further around the clock, and that's not just swinging it around my body, that's swinging it up my body and around my body. So these guys are right up here, and they're getting it there much faster than everyone else. And then from there, obviously, they've got this ability to get their arms really quick and get their arms and their hands at peak speed at the right point, because then you actually slow your hands down coming into impact to rotate the grip harder to get the head to speed up. So for me, really would be, for everyone listening, I'm sure that every one of them would benefit by using the Tour Tempo app and beginning to move a bit quicker.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's that app doesn't just say, hey, swing it like Martin Borgmeier's tempo or swing it like Rory McIlroy's tempo. It figures out a way to optimize each athlete's tempo for themselves, right? So I think this last weekend we had this amazing opportunity to see two very different styles of golf go head to head, right? And you look at someone like a Xander who looks very silky smooth, and yes, he's across the line.
I believe. He's an 824 on the app versus somebody like Rory or Bryson, which would be, I know Rory's 21.7, and Bryson being, doing a bit of long drive, he would have been messing around with 18.6. So, almost two stages up on the tempo, those two.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that little subtle change, 2 scales in tempo, is for the average person watching, they see a difference between, say, Ernie Els and Nick Price, right? They're seeing it looks that dramatic and it's only 2 scales. So that's amazing. When you look at optimizing a player's speed, right? If someone from this podcast takes the initiative and reaches out and says, "Hey, Steve, I've been on this journey to gain speed and I'm inundated with Instagram ads or social media posts of saying, hey, do overspeed training, do underspeed training, do overweight training, do underweight training." I am not an expert in this. That's why I try and make friends with smarter guys like yourself. So what is it that an athlete should do? Should they be finding a overspeed training program? Should they be thinking that the answer is how big their biceps are? Or what is kind of the low-hanging fruit to really see dramatic changes in your club head speed? If you're a junior golfer and you're at, let's just say, 95 miles an hour and to compete at the collegiate level, if you're not 115, you're probably irrelevant. If you're a female golfer and you're in the 80s, to be relevant, you need to be in the 90s or pretty close to that magic 100 number. What do you think it is for the average person? Do they need to go and buy a system? Do they need to do protocols? Give us your cheat sheet to trying to optimize their speed or start that speed journey.
Okay. So there's lots of speed training aids on the market, right? I mean, I've got my favorites, but there's lots on the market. 7-8 years ago, they came to the forefront. Some of the early starters in that speed training industry came out with some of the speed sticks and alike. Now we've got companies like Ripstick. Personally, I think it's a brilliant device. You've got Stack that has a Genius app attached to the device, and the magic's in the app. Now, the whole point of those speed training apps and aids is to get you into this kind of routine of training speed. Okay, so importantly, you need to understand you need to be very responsible with speed, and the first things I always talk about with player is the frequency. You need to be very careful with your frequency, and that's where something like a Stack is very good, because the app actually doesn't allow you to go onto the protocol and do it again until a certain days have passed. So you always should have rest days. If you work on speed, should never be really more than 20 minutes at most. If you're starting out on your speed journey, it shouldn't really be any more than 10 minutes. There should be a day off, so you're not speed training on day 2. You can do anything else, golf. If you're a college player, you need to be training golf daily, but you just don't do speed on day 2. Then you would do a speed session on day 3. You'd have a day off of speed on day 4. Then you would do speed on day 5 or day 6. So you'd only really do at most 3 speed training protocols of no more than 20 minutes at most during a week. And that would be a training week. If it was a tournament week, it'd be very different. And that'd be, we'll talk about that a bit later. So what you're doing with speed is that you're not only going to move a bit faster, you can play about with tempo, as we alluded to in the previous conversation that we was talking. But what you're trying to do is let the brain, you're trying to move faster, you're letting the brain self-organize, so it's getting used to body moving faster, it's getting used to club moving faster. And what I like to do then, if the body is then getting used to that and building up this tolerance of moving quicker, is that if you can consistently hold that speed, we talk about how you would do that, but if you consistently hold that club speed, I would then move the player into then doing ball speed training, so finding the center of the face. So if you go up a bit, get a bit faster, let's say you go up 2 or 3 mile an hour, then you would want to convert that club into ball and then get a bit more ball speed. Then you would try and push the club speed up again, let the brain self-organize, then put it into ball, find the center of the face. So that would be responsible because and sustainable. Responsible being the frequency being the right amount for the player, and sustainable because you're holding the speed in club and then turning it into ball, then getting a bit faster with club, instead of trying to go really fast with club and then can't even find the face and think, oh my God, I've ruined my golf, I can't do it anymore. A little bit, put it into ball, a little bit, find the face, put it into ball, and do it the right way and build it up over 9, 10, or even as much as 12 weeks. Don't do it. Don't try and get it really quick in the sense of trying to get speed in 1 week. It doesn't happen. Let it build up over time. Let the brain and the human self-organize and find the face.
Do you find that if you take those 9 to 12 weeks to build it up, then it lasts longer? Whereas if you just ramp it up, does it disappear just as fast? Or is that kind of the reason for that?
Yeah, and I think it's back to this sustainable. So, because with club speed comes the danger that a lot of people, because we've still got these myths out there where I'm gonna hit it all over the place. Well, if you jump too high, too fast in your speeds and you can't find the face, you've gone up too fast, too many levels of speed, and it's uncontrollable. You can't find the face. But if you go up a couple of miles an hour, then the human can self-organize. If it's done enough times, it can find the center of the face. Then a couple of miles an hour, then find the center of the face. It's sustainable, and you're getting it into ball speed. You're hitting it further and hitting it straighter. So it's doing it over, being responsible over a period of time, rather than trying to ramp it up, too quickly. And a lot of people get in there, and you're just like, I can go 20 minutes, and I can just pound out speed in 20 minutes, go faster. Not only could they potentially hurt themselves because they haven't conditioned, right? And that's what we see all the time. Oh, I hurt my elbow, I hurt my wrist, or the back's giving me some jip. Well, you've just gone at it too quickly. You should have done 10 minutes. You should have been doing that, 3 times over a period of a week with days off, and you should have built that up over 2-3 weeks. But it's usually the male ego that says, you know what, I can do it more and I'll do another one. Let me get another 10 minutes on top. You've got to be responsible with this stuff. And this is where the years of, and I learned this off Lee very early on, is that, the years you hear these experienced coaches, and that's what they've done. So it's not just, there are low hanging fruits that are going to give you some quick gains, but then understanding, you might gain 5 quite quickly, but the next 5 might take you several months, and in a long drive, that might take several years. Somebody like Martin, and Lee talks about this all the time, I believe he went from 130 up to 145 quite quickly. But to go to 145 clubhead speed into 150, 155 took years. You got conditioning training. Now he's got to go really into the physical aspect of his body. So the low-hanging fruit is there, but making sure that you train it responsibly over the right period of time.
Yeah, marginal gain theory, right? I love that. That's amazing. So when I hear players, right, if they're an elite junior or they're a college player and they start realizing that speed is something that they need to take that next step, a lot of times there's this misconception. And you did an amazing post a month ago or so. You called it like Mythbusters, and it was amazing about some of the nonsense that's out in social media right now on 3D motion capture and ground reaction force. So let's call this the Steve Furlonger Mythbuster section. Fade or draw creates more speed.
The thing is, and this is interesting, right? So when we were out, when I was out with you, we had the privilege of seeing Martin, right? We saw Martin, he come in the bay. Now, Martin over the years has hit draw. Now he's gone back to a fade. And he loves the fade. He loves seeing the ball fall to the right. We know that the upward attack angle for long drive is important because they've got low lofted clubs. They've got a 2 to 4 lofted, driver, and its length being considerably longer than what we would be using as a legal club to use in a professional or amateur competition. But they've got to hit it like 8-9 on the up. That upward motion is also an inward motion because the club for a right-handed golfer, when it's traveling up, it's traveling to the left. So generally what they need to do is match that with a swing direction, move the base of the swing, the baseline of the swing more out to the right, the swing direction, to net out that upward. So if you're swinging it 8 up, right, to get some extra launch, help with that launch, that you would need to swing it 6-7 out there to start to neutralize what would be the path to try and take the curve off the golf ball. So if we just left that and swung quite straight with the swing direction that much up, it would organically move left. So that's what Martin started to do. So, it's not necessarily about the shape. It's importantly understanding your upward, your inward. You certainly don't want to be hitting downward with a driver because, it's the least lofted club. So when you start hitting down, depending on what you're doing with the delivered loft angle, we might have a bit of a severe problem with spin and how the ball's going to climb. And for most mere mortal recreation golfers, we want to get it up in the air, right? And not chop down on it. That's going to cause a big problem. So, understanding that it's not really necessary about the shape. We've just got to get that path, the amount, the right amount, the face, the right amount to the path to give you a shape that's controllable. And if you've getting, obviously with the speed through it as well, you're getting it out of the apex of the club face, the high spot of the club face, then it's going to convert into ball speed.
So that was an amazing answer, and hopefully everyone learned a lot about D-plane and understanding how attack angle affects swing direction. And some people don't even really understand the difference between swing direction and swing path. And let's sure as heck hope that their coach does. And if their coach doesn't, they need to go find a new coach. But that's a whole nother rant that you and I could go on for days on. But you went around the question, draw or fade. The actual answer that you're saying is it depends.
It depends. I'm not going to give you an answer to that because I've seen long drivers that hit the ball a draw and I see long drivers that hit a ball with a fade. So, and tour players, arguably now we're seeing just as much. We're seeing certainly more of the modern generation coming out with fade. But back in the day, it was draw. We all loved the draw, right? Especially when I was a junior, especially with the equipment that we were using, closing that face to path just gave us a little bit more with the ball, maybe. And the way that we were hitting Persimmon Woods as well, maybe. Not 100% on that one again, because we didn't have the tracking systems. We were doing it a different way back then. We were taught the wrong way, but we were working it out another, especially from a draw and fade perspective, what we understood back then. What we was taught to do was very different to the truth of what we would actually must have learned to do organically. So, I think that you really have to, for me, it's got to be, if we've got this big glancing blow, if we've got a big left or a big right path, and that's glancing, and then you've got to get the face away from that path, and we're going to have a big problem with that ultimately going down towards target enough because it's going to start curving away from target too much.
Love that. So my second myth buster, right? I've heard time and time again, maybe not so much now in the demographic that I'm coaching, but when I first started coaching at the club level and I was a club pro in Connecticut, people would always say to me, I need to hit the ball lower to make it go farther. And what I'm seeing, right, and we had that privilege of watching the fastest man in the world, and that thing was, I don't know, I think we had to remove some of the air traffic from around the resort because it was so high. So what are you, it was wild. So is there kind of one of these things, 100 feet? I mean, we saw, 130 feet this weekend. Pretty common seeing somewhere between 120 and 130 feet from those players. And obviously, every internet troll that's listening to this is going to say, yeah, but they also have to hit the low fairway finder. To be clear, we're not talking about the low fairway finder. When we're trying to optimize speed and distance, is there a benefit to hit it higher?
Well, firstly, I go back and you can find a lot of these charts, especially from the club fitting companies, your Pings, etc., which will give you the optimizers and launch monitors like TrackMan, etc. Have we all got these launch optimizer tabs on them now, and we can tap in very quickly on what we should launch and spin the ball. Slower speeds are going to have to launch the ball a bit higher, okay? Because ultimately, speed, if it's translating into the ball, is ball speed. It's some spin there as well, properties to that. So they're not going to quite get the spin, so they're going to have to launch it a bit higher to get it up in the air. Then with their speed, their spin, then they're going to get it to soar and climb the right amount. So slower speeds are going to need to launch it a bit higher, say 14, and then get the RPM up enough to be able to get the ball to soar. Then your higher speeds are going to launch it a little bit lower, and they're not going to have as much spin, so they can climb it and get it to soar the right amount for the speed. So probably most people listening to this, are from making sure that they get the upward angle correct. I'd always say that you don't want to be hitting it too much on the up. Around 4 would be the most you want to be, but tall players are about 2 on the upright average. Most of the top players in the world now are 2 up. We talk about Rory being 6 up. Most of our listeners are probably going to be wanting to launch it anything, from 12 to 14 degrees with their driver. Get their spin over, 2,500 RPM, something like that. That would be enough. 2.8 maybe, just to help it climb a bit more. But tall players, we might want to bring it down a bit more because they'll be launching it a bit lower and not soaring up too quick. So there's a bit more to it before it hits its peak height. Yep. We got to get it to launch and spin correctly for the speed.
Awesome. And then all things relative, if we get that launch and that spin correct, is there this magic window where people start to see? Are we talking 100, 130 feet, or does that?
Yeah, it's gonna be around that. And again, it's ultimately, we're not gonna, if we get something that's going up too high initially and it's getting up too quickly, it's going to drop out of the sky if it's not got the spin on it. We got the problem with that because they've just sent it up and it drops. Then it's that initial launch and climb and soar. So, quoting you with your numbers there, it's going to be around that. But I would say it's more of that physics of impact, and how that ball goes out first is essential. And we've got the launch monitors, even on our mobile phone now, most of the coaches tracking ball, right? So, just looking at the launch, the initial launch of the ball itself and its spin, I'd get some focus on that. And if any listeners out there have not been on a launch monitor or TrackMan, go and get your driver checked out. And even, top tracers at driving ranges now, there's enough TrackMan ranges, top tracer ranges that give you some good ball data, some good ball launch data and direction data that give you some idea of how high it's traveling or how high you're hitting it at the start.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And hopefully the listeners do realize, okay, it's not just about, did I carry this thing 295? It's more about, hey, did I optimize to get it 295, right? Because they might be leaving something on the table. So I agree. I think we should employ all of the listeners to make sure that they know their club delivery numbers and their ball data. If a player is fortunate enough to come to you, they have the opportunity to also understand these dual plates and understanding what ground reaction forces do. And it would be silly of me not to sit here and ask you, who's an expert in that field, some of these questions. But when we look at a player that's trying to make those marginal gains to gain some speed, are there certain things that they can do? I know when you started this journey and you brought that first body track from Canada over to the UK, you were not, I don't want to say surprised, but it just stood out to you that, hey, these guys are creating 200% of that vertical force, right? Are there some other things that you're noticing? Are we noticing certain things in the frontal force or certain things in the lateral force that have some commonalities between players that have speed or are leaving speed on the table?
Yes, absolutely. So our 3D force plates, should I say, are measuring force in 3 directions. So if we were to simply coin it, for those that are just listening and not watching it, you got force to and away from the ball. Okay, we call those AP or frontal forces. Different companies call them different names, but we're pushing the ground in a straight line towards the ball, and we're getting a reaction away from it, or we're pushing the ground away from the ball. It's a force in the direction away from the ball, which is giving us a ground reaction towards the ball. Ultimately, that force will aid our ability to thrust. Okay, we are thrusting towards the ball or thrusting away from the ball. That's what that kind of forwards and backwards force is ultimately created. It will create a talk about our center of mass as well, but I'll move on to that in a minute. So AP force or frontal force is that forward and back. We got side to side, okay? So medial lateral, if you want to call it that, or lateral forces, but a side to side towards the target and away from the target. Okay, they're the new forces that have come out with these plates, because we've been measuring the third one, which we've just talked about there, the vertical force pushing into the ground. Okay, and ultimately that's given us this rise. So we've got thrust, we've got sway, and we've got lift or drop. Okay, now that's creating a movement in some way, shape, or form, a good way, especially if we take the sway forces, because sway is important. Okay, if we told a boxer not to sway, or we told somebody throwing a ball that they're not allowed to sway away from where they want to throw the ball, that we actually said to them, I want you to sway towards where you throw the ball and then try and propel your arm, or even a tennis player for that matter, make them sway towards the ball and try and hit a ball rather than sway back, and get these lateral forces working and get some momentum in their weight and their body and get it moving backwards and forwards. So this sway force and this thrust, to some degree, this extensional thrust and these lift forces are very important. So then when we take these three linear forces, okay, and these systems now they track center of mass. We've been calling it weight shift for decades, right? Everyone move your weight across. Well, now we track weight with the center of mass, which is your average location of your mass. So there's your center of mass is where there's equal mass above, below, and either side. It sits about where your belly button is, and when you're in golf posture, it sits where your belly button is, slightly out in front of it. Our forces, okay, how we push three-dimensionally through the ground, create a force back up through our center of mass to move in three ways. But also, when that force is directed away from our center of mass, that creates a torque, a rotation about it. Okay? Now, how far that force is angled away, that's called a moment arm. Now, I might be getting into deep stuff here, but a moment arm, very easy to coin it. If I ask you to take the wheel off your car, you jacked it up, I gave you a little spanner, and you're trying to, with the wheel nut, you're trying with a little spanner to lever it with a little spanner. And then I gave you a big tire wrench, which is a long lever. The reason why the long lever works is that you're applying a force further away from the nut. So it's a force multiplier, because the length of the lever is multiplying your force. So it's an easy way of looking at it. So if we point our forces away from our center of mass through this three-dimensional force and reaction, it's going to put energy in the system that helps the body tilt, bend, and turn. So we're trying to rotate, we're trying to come out of these trail high tilts and switch to, lead high tilts. We're trying to go from some flex position to extended position to flex to extended, and we're trying to rotate out the way, subject to swing direction and angle of attack. We're trying to rotate out the way to help move the club. So we're sway lifting and thrusting, we're tilt bending and turning. So these ground reaction forces are ultimately, now we measure the sway force, the lateral and the AP force. They're two very, very important forces now that we can measure that help create those dimensions of movement, sway lift and thrust, and tilt bend and turn.
That's amazing. And I love everything about that. And while I don't have a decade of study in it like you have, since getting my 3D plates, it's something that I've become obsessed at looking at, right? And the thing that stands out to me, and when the listeners are hearing what you said, some of them are excited because now they understand something, and others could say, wow, that seems too much. But what they don't really understand, and what I didn't understand when I was younger and getting coached before any of this technology was out, or even when I started coaching and we didn't have access to these things, force precedes motion, right? So if you're talking about swaying, thrusting, lifting, dropping, I think a lot of times the recreational golfer or the golfer that's maybe very elite but doesn't quite have the tacit knowledge of 3D or force plates, they are worried about swaying or they are worried about thrusting, and they see this thrust as this negative connotation. Since acquiring these plates and capturing players and training players on them and seeing the changes that I'm able to make, one of the things that I think I'm starting to play around with the most and probably changed the way that I coach is, for a long time I used to think thrust was bad. And now I'm starting to see thrust as kind of that magic thing to allow a player to access some speed.
100%. And, as you've found yourself as well, and, and the education stuff that we did, together, is that it's all about timings, right?
Yeah.
If you apply force at the right time, the body will move then appropriately after those forces. Like you said, alluded to there, force precedes motion. So if we get that sequence correct, and there's a sequence of ground reaction forces, there's the side to side, getting the peaks of the side to side going, then the peaks of the front and back going, and then the peaks of the down going. So we kind of do our swaying motion, and there is a lateral sway of the pelvis before the rib cage towards the target. It's what the best players do, whether you want to call it recentering or whatever. The pelvis moves in best players laterally towards the target before it moves rotationally towards the target. So you need sway force to do that. You need some side to side. So that side to side has got a peak, then that forwards and backwards, which creates turn. So the body can move back, it can turn, and then it goes through its change of tilts and rising and extension. If we get the timings of it, and these are where these force plates are so great, Zach, is that we can measure exactly when those forces are peaking, whereas we didn't before. And this is the problem with video, when you're eyeballing it and you're saying, oh, I think he's peaking his vertical forces then. I'm pretty good at looking at video and seeing when the belt buckle rises up, but that's a trained eye of over a decade. You may as well just close your eyes and try and point on the video. You've got a better chance. So our force plates, you guys have got them. I've got them. There's plenty of force plates out there. There's lots of guys doing it. Go and measure it and make sure you're applying force at the right time. And also, if you can apply force for a period of time, so force over time is called impulse. So when we look at our graph, it's not necessarily how high the peak is. I like to call it the base of the mountain. Are they applying a force over time long enough as well? Because, peaks are just one part of that whole story. There's lots of action going on around it. So timings and the amounts and how long they're applying force for are very important.
Love that. And I couldn't agree more. I think every player that's trying to improve, whether that's trying to improve their score in their Sunday medal or trying to improve their score on Sunday at the PGA Championship, I think it's extremely important that not only do they go and get captured when they're struggling, but they should also really go and get captured when they're playing their best, because that allows coaches like you and I to say, oh, wow, when you play your best, this is where we're seeing this timing. So I know it's not always the same, and I would never sit here and say there's some specific time that's magic for every golfer universally. But to clarify for some of the listeners, we're trying to see that lateral or medial lateral force, depending on how you're measuring it, from where in the golf swing. Let's just assume everyone understands the P positions because that'll be the easiest for you to explain. Is that from, are we trying to see that peak at P4? Are we trying to see that a little bit before? Where are you seeing that?
Well, the push away from the target is going to be, that's underneath the trail foot, the foot action away from the target, straight line away from the target to get a reaction towards the target. That will actually start at around shaft horizontal P2 on the way back.
Yeah, so I don't want to interrupt you, but I really want people to hear what you just said. The peak force pushing your trail foot away from the target is happening halfway back in the backswing, not in the downswing.
Yeah, no. So the force will start at P2. Okay, that outward force starts and it will grow to its peak amount just before top of backswing.
Amazing. And when we said before, force precedes motion, right? So those players that are going to the top, waiting to try and shift, they've already left speed on the table because they're not applying that force. So starting that force halfway back in your backswing, having it peak top of backswing, start of transition. And then when we start talking about those AP forces, right? Or for someone listening, shoving your toes into the front of your shoe or shoving your heel into the back of your shoe is what Steve's talking about. Where do we start to see those forces being applied and where are they peaking?
The trail foot will be, pushing first. So the trail foot, as we're pushing outwards, we're also pushing backwards. Okay. So that trail foot force, heel in toe direction. So heel that you're pushing towards the foot action. The toe direction is the ground reaction. So a heel to toe ground reaction force on the AP under that trail foot. That's starting at least halfway back, if not earlier, because we're applying force under that foot outwards and backwards. Yeah. That's helping that trail side of the pelvis begin to transition. So we know that the pelvis is slowing down and changing direction, right? It's slowing down. We want the pelvis to kind of begin to slow down halfway back and begin to change direction before top of backswing. But we know the pelvis is moving laterally towards the target then as well. So the pelvis is slowing down in its rotational format, but sliding laterally towards the target as it's slowing down, and then it's sliding, and then it's rotating back towards the target. So your outward, your medial lateral forces start at around P2 shaft horizontal. They peak before top of backswing. Your AP force, heel to toe under the trail foot, is starting halfway back. That will peak early downswing. And then we've got to have that counter, and should we say that there's a second force underneath the left foot from toe directed force forwards, heel ground reaction force. So toe to heel underneath the lead foot, and it needs to be greater than the trail. And that couple, so if I go heel to toe directed ground reaction under the trail, toe to heel directed ground reaction under the lead, I've now got forces pushing, turning my body, helping me rotate and accelerate and rotate towards the target. So I like to describe that as like an analogy. If we had a merry-go-round, and we had a little boy, a baby boy in the merry-go-round, and there was two of us, and we got mummy and daddy pushing the merry-go-round. And we got mummy, which is the trail foot, pushing the merry-go-round forwards. If we had daddy, which is the lead foot on the other side, pushing the merry-go-round backwards, we've got a force going that way and a force going that way. It's the reason why when we open our bottle of Coke, our fingers go like that. We've got one force being applied in one direction, and then that couple of the force in the reverse on the other side of the object, twisting it. So it needs to be a contribution from the trail and a lead, peaking those as we get to before halfway down.
It's amazing. And that that understanding and that ability to kind of have a coaching approach based on teaching that has really evolved my coaching, and your education is at the forefront of that. So I thank you for that, because not only are my players getting faster, but they're starting to understand how to create rotation, right? And we've been inundated with this for the last decade on social media of you got to get open, you got to get open. But until I was able to see that coupling of what the trail foot's doing and what the leads foot doing, I was just telling players to turn, and actually they weren't turning, they were just tilting, and it was a complete disaster. So when are we seeing that vertical force, and how much? Obviously, it's the thing we've had access to for the longest. Is it in the hierarchy of needs, right? Are we talking vertical force is still at the top, or are we saying that as we learn more about these 3D ground reaction forces, we're starting to see that, as the system that we use calls it, frontal force? Some people call it AP force if you're on a swing catalyst. But what are you seeing as is there one that's more important, or, to go back and probably answer the question for you, is it when the timing of those are?
Yeah, so vertical force is the greatest force, when we combine its value, because we've got a trail foot value of vertical force, a lead foot value of vertical force. We combine them. If we do AP, combine it, we got medial lateral, both feet, combine it. Vertical force by far is the greatest. Okay. The fastest, they're getting north of 2.5 times their body.
Yeah.
Okay. Seen as much as 3 times body weight. 300%, if you're 100 kilos, there's 300 kilos of force going down into the ground. That's a heck of a lot of force. We got a mini earthquake going on here, right? So they are crushing the ground. They're pushing really, really hard. But if you do that late, that energy that has got to go back up through the system and hit the first major segment, which is the pelvis.
Yeah.
We need the pelvis to rise going into impact. If that force is mainly up the lead side, it's going to create tilt. So the lead side displaces as well. So the whole of the pelvis is going up. It's also tilting. Okay. If you're doing that, if you're pushing into the ground late, you're not going to have that pelvis rise and pelvis tilt going into impact. And that's really quite important from a speed perspective, because that going up through the body and what it does up through the lead shoulder system allows you to apply a force to the handle in a way that's going to create a rotation to get the club head to kick forwards, right at the point that you need the head to speed up, which is at impact.
Yeah.
So the vertical force is critical, peaking under the lead foot, getting to its greatest amount, and combined, both feet together, the peak being at shaft vertical on the way down for driver. Okay. It might be a bit later around shaft horizontal for iron. We can get away with it with iron because it's not moving as fast. Wedge even later than that, a bit fraction later. But if you took shaft vertical as the point, really, and we should work from that point for tour players, long drivers, it will be before then because they're moving it faster. That's done at the right point in the downswing for the energy to go up into the system, for the body, force precedes motion, to move correctly into impact and not incorrectly post-impact.
I love that. And I think when I review this podcast and when people listen to this, they're going to hear a lot of information, and they're going to hear a lot of terms that maybe they're not used to, and hopefully they do some research on that and they start to pay attention. But the thing that stands out to me with what you just explained is it's not just about timing. It's not just about force. It's not just about centerness of contact or optimizing your launch. It's about all of it. And that's why people need to have coaches. And if you are a coach, it's why you need to have education to make sure you have the correct pedagoggical approach, so you're not just guessing, right? Why guess when we can measure, right? We have this information so we can measure it. The system that we both use has the ability to basically create our amazing studios with 3D force plates and 3D and give that to the average user just in a $15 a month app. So if they're smart, they'll go and get the Motion to Coach app, or if you're a coach, it would be smart to follow up with Steve and get some further education on this. If someone wanted to learn more, Steve, about this information, obviously they can go to your website, they can go to your social media. Do you offer training to recreational golfers, elite golfers, coaches alike, or can you explain to the people that now are intrigued about, am I creating the force at the right time, or am I optimizing? How do they learn more about you, and how do they learn, more importantly, more from you?
Okay, so if you've tuned into this, and this is an appetizer. Going forwards, there's a ton on my YouTube channel, Steve Furlonger Golf Performance. There's loads of videos. There's some old but gold videos on there, and there's some new videos on there as well. I'm always putting new stuff up there. Social media, obviously, quick clips. We know that Instagram, we're putting the your 2-minute, fairly short clips, but the long stuff is on YouTube. I offer lessons just for golf. I've got pros that have lessons with me, coaches that have lessons with me, and recreational golfers on Skillist. If again, we don't necessarily, I know we have Motion to Coach, which is a brilliant tool. You and I both use that. It's a mobile phone app that predicts ground reaction forces, and it does 2 of the forces really well because it measures from a point that it can, and they track center of mass as well. It's a brilliant app. If you've got really good light, it's tremendous. And now, obviously, with the communication tools like Skillist, you can share videos. So Skillist is there for lessons. Education, I do one-to-one stuff via private Teams calls or Zoom calls, where I do screen shares. If people have got force plate systems and want to learn more, so these would be coaches, I do, private education, individual sessions, or, like I did at your place earlier on this year, where I do these coach camps, either in the States, I'm doing a lot in Asia at the moment, and in Europe. The coach camps where you can come and learn about ground reaction forces, go through all of the basics and understanding all of the different systems, how to use the different systems, and then getting out then in the live stuff in the afternoon that you experienced as well, getting the live stuff. So there's actually some lessons going on. I give lessons in the afternoon for those that attend. They can go on the plates and we can get their data and then compare and look at different patterns and different shots. So I do 2 days worth of education, ground reaction forces as one, and there's like speed on day 2. And I also do collabs with other coaches, Lee Cox being the first one. That was my collab. And I've now started to collab with people like Andreas Calli and Hugh Marr going forwards as well, doing different, ground reaction force plus other motion camps with those.
That's amazing. And I hope everybody that listened or tuned in and saw our wonderful faces here on the YouTube reach out to you and learn more, because this really was just an appetizer. And when I first started diving into this, I thought I knew stuff, and then the more I got farther into it, the more I realized I didn't know shit. And then I got farther down the line, and I realized that the best way to get better is to think that I have it kind of an understanding, and then to reach out to someone like yourself and either shed light on, hey, you're on the right track, or watch out, this is the direction you need to go. So if you're someone that is trying to gain speed, I would encourage you to reach out to somebody like Steve. If you're someone that wants to learn how to coach at a higher level using, whether it's 3D motion capture, 3D ground reaction forces, or you're trying to take the younger generation and give them speed, sustainable speed, as you said, over a period of time, then they need to reach out to you. I will reach out to you way more. This reminded me how much I miss hanging out with you and talking to you. Every time that I get to sit with you, it makes me think about the next study or the next thing that we should do together. So I thank you so much for the time, man. You're the best. And maybe the next time I see you, I won't have 240 mile an hour ball speed. but hopefully it won't be 140 mile an hour ball speed. So I appreciate you so much, my man. This was so fun. You also don't just hit 500 balls without a thought.
Welcome to Earned Not Given.